Hello, welcome back to History of Wine and the Vine. I'm Emily Kate. So this week we're kicking off a huge series on drinking and drunkenness. So we're going to be kind of discussing lots of different civilizations and how different stratas of society, different genders, how everybody throughout history dealt with drinking and drunkenness. So a big topic, but don't worry, we've got lots of lectures planned. So this week we're kicking off with ancient Israel. So we're going to kind of be discussing how it was perceived, how drunkenness was perceived, when it was permissible, when it wasn't. So let's get started. Drunkenness in kind of the Bible was generally associated with certain behavioral things, which were not very friendly. So we have staggering, exposure, nausea, vomiting, sleep, and coma. So clearly people were getting exceedingly drunk if vomiting, coma, and exposure were part of these. So definitely the kind of excessive drinking was being done at that time. But also, if you look at kind of the number one term that was used to explain that someone was drunk, it was that they had a merry heart. And I think that that's pretty telling, because that means that for the most part, people were kind of keeping their drinking to a responsible level. And that's kind of nice, but obviously those behaviors that they described were not quite so nice. But due to this kind of duality that we have between going way too far and just kind of drinking to have a merry heart, it was definitely encouraged on a daily basis that you would just drink to have a merry heart. It would encourage sociability, and people would kind of be able to relax with a glass of wine. This was not prohibited in any way, but then kind of the other side of getting very drunk was actually at times it was dealt with in the Bible under crisis situations. So for instance, Noah, the world floods, everything as he knows it is over, and he gets drunk. And then you have Lot's daughters, who mistakenly believe that the propagation of the human species depends on them, and all that's available man-wise is their father. So they get him drunk and propagate the species. So definitely kind of a crisis situation is when that happens. But as you can tell, there's a lot of differences between those two stories. But one is that you were open to trickery and deceit, that you were kind of vulnerable when you were drunk. So this was definitely taken to heart, and it was not encouraged that you would get drunk unless you were at like a banquet. So a banquet was probably the most common place where drunkenness was encouraged and permissible, and you were kind of in a safe space. So when would you have a banquet? Well, you would have a banquet when you had when you kind of finished a very laborious period during the year. So for instance, at the end of shearing all your sheep, or at the end of the harvest, or at the end of the vintage, you would have a huge feast and you would have lots of food. Everyone would be invited. It would be a safe space, and you would get drunk. And then we also have kind of life cycle events. So obviously weddings, that still happens. People get drunk at weddings. But also to celebrate the weaning of a child. So kind of the different cycles of your life were kind of punctuated with these banquets, which was really lovely. And one extra thing that I wanted to tell you about, that I read about, is actually the idea of a sibling feast. And this was when the parents had to leave, and the children of the family would sit together and discuss the parents, and kind of discuss what they call repositioning. That seems like a nice word to talk about, you know, a lot of mischievous things, but repositioning, and it was supposed to facilitate kind of family bonding or sibling bonding. And in this banquet, drunkenness was definitely encouraged. So here's some instances where drunkenness was perfectly fine, some where it wasn't so fine, and the attitudes that ancient kind of Israelis had towards wine. So I hope that you enjoyed this. If you did, click that thumbs up button right there, and subscribe if you want to hear more. We have a lot of fun lectures coming up, and I will see you next week. Cheers!